At 85 years old, most people are thinking about retirement. But Caleb was asking God for the most dangerous, giant infested mountain in the Promised Land as his inheritance. This was the culmination of a lifetime of unwavering faith that began decades earlier when he was one of only two spies who believed God could deliver on his promises. Today, we're diving into the complete, untold story of Caleb, from his early days as a spy to his final victory over the giants that had haunted Israel for nearly half a century. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The two who stood alone. The wilderness stretches endlessly under a blazing sun. Sand shifts beneath countless feet as the children of Jacob move through the Sinai. 40 years they will wander here, but today they stand at the edge of promise. Moses calls 12 men forward, one from each tribe. Their mission: scout the land flowing with milk and honey. Among them walks Caleb, son of Jephunneh, from the tribe of Judah. His eyes hold something different. Where others see uncertainty, he sees opportunity. The spies cross into Canaan, rich valleys spread before them, vineyards heavy with fruit, cities fortified with massive stones. But something else catches their attention. The people who live here tower above normal men. The sons of Anak, giants. 40 days pass as they explore every corner. They see the abundance God promised. Grapes so large it takes 2 men to carry a single cluster. Pomegranates that fill a man's palm. Figs sweet as honey. The land indeed flows with goodness. But they also see the cities. Walls that scrape the sky. Warriors whose shadows stretch like trees. Fortresses built into mountainsides. The Hittites control the mountains, the Jebusites hold the high places, the Amorites command the valleys. When the spies return, all of Israel gathers to hear their report. The first words paint paradise, the fruit speaks for itself. Massive clusters of grapes hang from poles carried between men. The crowd murmurs with excitement. Then comes the word that changes everything. But 10 voices unite in fear. The people there are powerful beyond measure. The cities stand fortified to heaven. Giants walk among them like living monuments. We appeared as grasshoppers in their sight. We cannot prevail against such strength. Terror spreads through the camp like wildfire. Whispers become shouts. Shouts become wails. The dream of the promised land crumbles into nightmare. But 2 voices rise above the chaos. Joshua, son of Nun, steps forward. His voice cuts through the fear. Beside him stands Caleb, and his words burn with conviction that silences the crowd. "Let us go up at once and possess it," Caleb declares. His voice carries no doubt, no hesitation. "We are well able to overcome it." The camp erupts. How dare they speak such words? Have they not seen the giants? Have they not witnessed the fortified cities? The people surge forward, their fear transforming into rage. But Caleb continues. His voice grows stronger, not weaker, in the face of opposition. The land we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. More than good, beyond anything they had imagined. Joshua joins him. They tear their clothes in anguish, not from fear, but from watching their people reject such blessing. "If the Lord delights in us," they cry, "he will bring us into this land and give it to us." The crowd will not listen. Stones appear in hands. Death fills the air. The very men who had walked in the promised land now face execution for believing in it. 10 spies had seen giants and declared defeat. 2 spies had seen the same giants and proclaimed victory. The difference was not in their eyes, but in their hearts. One group saw obstacles, the other saw opportunities for God to display his power. Caleb stands unmoved as rocks are raised against him. This is the cost of courage. This is the price of faith when surrounded by fear. He has tasted the grapes of Canaan. He has walked its hills. He has seen both its promise and its challenges. More than seeing, he has believed. Beyond the evidence of his eyes lies the evidence of God's character. The same God who split the Red Sea can crumble city walls. The same God who defeated Pharaoh can scatter giants like leaves. But the people choose fear over faith. They choose the familiar wilderness over the frightening promise. They prefer the certainty of slavery's memory to the uncertainty of freedom's future. At that moment, the glory of the Lord appears in the tent of meeting. The divine presence blazes forth, and every stone falls from every hand. God himself enters the debate. How long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me yet, despite all the signs I have performed among them? The verdict comes swift and final. The adults who rejected the promise will never see it fulfilled. They will wander in this wilderness until their bones bleach in the sand. 40 years for 40 days. 1 year for each day they spied the land and chose fear. But not all will die in the desert. Because Caleb has a different spirit within him and has followed me fully, God declares, I will bring him into the land, and his descendants shall possess it. 2 men out of 600,000, 2 voices of faith in an ocean of fear, 2 believers in a generation of doubters. The crowd disperses, the stones are forgotten, but the consequences remain. A entire generation will pay the price for this moment of faithlessness, except for 2 men who stood alone when standing alone cost everything. Caleb returns to his tent that night, knowing his path is set. While others will die in the wilderness, he will live to claim the promise. Not because he is stronger or braver, but because he chose to believe when belief seemed impossible. The giants are still there, the fortified cities still stand. The challenges have not diminished, but neither has God's promise. Neither has Caleb's faith. Tomorrow, the wilderness years begin. Tomorrow, the dying starts. But tomorrow also begins the greatest test of faith any man will ever face. 40 years of waiting for God to keep his word. Grapes, giants, and rebellion. Step back to the beginning, to the moment everything changed. 12 men crossed the border into Canaan. The promised land spreads before them like an unread scroll. Each step reveals new wonders. Each valley holds fresh discoveries. Caleb walks among them, but he walks differently. While others count obstacles, he counts blessings. While others measure walls, he measures possibilities. His heart has already made its choice before his eyes confirm what they will see. They enter from the south, through the Negev. Desert gives way to gardens. Sparse vegetation becomes abundant growth. The contrast strikes them immediately. This is not the wilderness they have known. This is the land of promise made manifest. The valley of Eshcol stretches before them. Here the vines grow thick and heavy. Clusters of grapes hang like purple jewels. Some are so large they bend the branches. Others require both hands to lift. One cluster catches their attention, massive beyond anything they have seen. It takes 2 men to carry it on a pole between them. This single bunch of fruit weighs more than a small child. The juice runs sweet and rich, the promise of the land condensed into visible, tangible form. But Caleb's eyes move beyond the fruit to the cities beyond. Hebron rises in the distance. Ancient stones form walls that have stood for generations. This is where the giants dwell, the sons of Anak, the descendants of the Nephilim. The spies approach carefully. These are not ordinary men. They tower above normal height. Their weapons are crafted for hands twice the size of common warriors. Their voices carry like thunder across the valleys. Yet Caleb studies them without trembling. He notes their movements. He observes their defenses. He measures their numbers. But more than this, he measures them against the power of the God who called Abraham from Ur, the God who drowned Pharaoh's army, the God who split rocks to provide water. The other spies see the same sights and reach different conclusions. The giants appear invincible. The cities seem impregnable. The land may flow with milk and honey, but it also flows with the blood of those who dare challenge its current inhabitants. For 40 days, they explore every region. They walk the hill country where the Hittites have built their strongholds. They survey the coastal plains where the Canaanites control the trade routes. They climb the mountains where the Jebusites hold the high ground. Each day brings new evidence of both blessing and challenge. The land exceeds every description Moses had given them. Springs of fresh water bubble from rocks. Olive groves stretch across hillsides. Date palms, heavy with fruit, line the valleys. But the inhabitants prove equally impressive. Warriors trained from birth, cities fortified with engineering beyond their understanding, military alliances that span the region. 10 of the spies begin to counsel retreat before they even return. How can a wandering people armed with shepherd's tools conquer such an established civilization? How can they defeat giants when they barely defeated Amalekites? But Caleb's thoughts move in different directions. He remembers Egypt's power and Egypt's fall. He recalls the Red Sea's waters and their supernatural parting. He thinks of manna appearing each morning and water flowing from rocks. The same God who performed these wonders has promised this land. The same power that freed them from slavery can free this territory from its current occupants. The giants are tall, but God is higher. The walls are thick, but God is stronger. When they return to camp, the moment of decision arrives immediately. The entire congregation gathers to hear their report. 600,000 souls wait to learn their fate. The spies begin with the positive. The land flows with milk and honey. Here is the evidence. They display the massive grapes, the pomegranates, the figs. The crowd gasps at the abundance. Dreams of plenty fill their hearts. Then comes the devastating turn. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. We saw the descendants of Anak there. The mood shifts instantly. Hope transforms into dread. The fruit, moments before a symbol of promise, now becomes a symbol of impossibility. How can they enjoy such abundance if giants guard every vineyard? The report continues with relentless detail. The Amalekites dwell in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites control the mountains. The Canaanites hold both the seacoast and the Jordan Valley. Enemies surround them on every side. But Caleb will not let fear have the final word. He steps forward, his voice cutting through the growing panic. The Hebrew word he uses carries weight beyond its translation. Aloh na'ale, let us go up by all means. Not maybe. Not eventually. Not when conditions improve. Now. We are well able to overcome it, he declares. The Hebrew suggests complete confidence, total assurance, absolute certainty of victory. The crowd rejects his words immediately. The 10 spies counter with renewed emphasis on the dangers. The people there are stronger than we are, they insist. They spread an evil report about the land they had spied. Evil report. The Hebrew term suggests something twisted, corrupted, diseased. Not merely negative, but spiritually poisonous. Their fear has infected their testimony. Their doubt has corrupted their witness. The land devours its inhabitants, they claim. It is a land where giants are common as grass. We were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. But their words reveal the deeper problem. We were like grasshoppers in our own sight. The giants did not make them feel small. They made themselves feel small. Their problem was not external, but internal, not military, but spiritual. The congregation erupts in rebellion. They weep all night. They turn against Moses and Aaron. They speak of choosing a new leader and returning to Egypt. The promised land, so close they could taste its fruit, becomes more distant than ever. Joshua joins Caleb in desperate appeal. They tear their clothes in anguish, not from fear of giants, but from grief over unbelief. They have walked in paradise and watched their people choose exile. If the Lord delights in us, they cry, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. Do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Bread for us. The giants who terrify others will nourish God's people. The obstacles that paralyze the fearful will strengthen the faithful. The challenges that defeat the doubters will feed the believers. But the people will not listen. Stones fill their hands. Death fills their hearts. The very men who offer them paradise face execution for their faithfulness. At that moment, divine intervention arrives. The glory of the Lord blazes forth. Every stone drops. Every voice falls silent. God himself addresses the rebellion. The verdict is swift and final. This generation will die in the wilderness. 40 years of wandering for 40 days of faithlessness. Every adult who rejected the promise will perish in the desert. But 2 men will live to claim the inheritance. 2 voices of faith in a sea of fear. 2 believers who saw grapes where others saw graves. 2 servants who followed fully when following cost everything. The grapes of Eshcol still hang heavy in memory. The giants of Hebron still stand in the land. But now the path is set. A generation must die for their unbelief, and 2 men must wait 40 years to possess what they could have claimed in 40 days. 40 years in the sand. The sentence begins immediately. The next morning, the children of Jacob turn away from Canaan's border, their faces set toward the wilderness that will become their graveyard. 600,000 souls condemned to wander until death claims all who chose fear over faith. But 2 men among them carry a different burden. While others march toward death, Caleb and Joshua march toward destiny. Their sentence is life, not death. Their wilderness years are preparation, not punishment. The mathematics of judgment unfold with terrible precision. 1 year for each day they spied the land, 40 years for 40 days. Every sunrise brings them closer to the grave or closer to the promise, depending on which side of faith they chose in that crucial moment. Caleb watches the first death. A man he knew from childhood, someone who had crossed the Red Sea beside him, someone who had eaten manna from the same ground. Now he lies beneath wilderness stones, his dreams buried with his bones. Then another dies, and another. The pattern establishes itself early. This generation will not see Canaan except in memory. They tasted its fruit but rejected its challenges. They saw its abundance but chose its absence. The dying happens slowly at first, natural deaths from age and disease, but the wilderness is harsh, and fear makes it harsher. When people lose hope for tomorrow, today becomes harder to survive. Caleb buries friends who once stood with him at Sinai. He speaks words over graves of men who heard God's voice at the mountain. He covers with sand the bodies of women who danced when Pharaoh's army drowned. Each burial weighs heavy on his heart, but not with despair, with purpose. These deaths are not meaningless. They fulfill God's word with the same precision as his promises. Justice and mercy both flow from the same source. The years accumulate like sand in the wind. 5 years pass, 10 years, 15. The camp shrinks as the condemned generation fades away. Children grow into adults. Adults grow into leaders. The wilderness becomes home to those too young to remember Egypt. But Caleb does not merely survive, he prepares. While others count days until death, he counts days until victory. While others remember Canaan as the land they lost, he envisions Canaan as the land he will claim. His 40 years are not penance, but training. He learns patience in the waiting. Faith grows stronger through testing, not weaker. Like a sword heated and hammered, his trust in God's promises becomes unbreakable through repeated trials. The wilderness teaches him lessons no classroom could provide. He learns to find water in dry places. He discovers strength in barren seasons. He masters the art of hope deferred but not destroyed. Other spies from that fateful mission die one by one. The men who brought evil reports breathe their last in the sand they chose over the promised land. Their fear becomes their fate. Their doubt becomes their doom. But Caleb continues. Each funeral reminds him of his unique calling. Each death confirms God's faithfulness to his word. Judgment and promise both arrive exactly as predicted. The children who were babies during the spy mission grow into warriors. They listen to Caleb's stories about Canaan with fresh ears. They see the grapes of Eshcol through eyes unclouded by their parents' fear. Joshua shares the burden of survival and leadership. 2 men carrying the memory of promise through 4 decades of wilderness. 2 witnesses to what was and what will be. 2 bridges between the generation that died in unbelief and the generation that will live in victory. Years 20 through 30 bring the heaviest dying. The adults in their prime during the rebellion now reach old age in the desert. The wilderness becomes a vast cemetery. Bones whiten under the endless sun, but even in death, God's mercy appears. The people who die in the wilderness still die as his people. Their rebellion excluded them from the promise, but not from his love. They are buried with hope for their children, even if not for themselves. Caleb ages but does not weaken. His body changes, but his faith remains constant. Where other men grow bitter in disappointment, he grows stronger in expectation. His hope is not wishful thinking, but settled confidence in God's character. The new generation begins to look to him for wisdom. He becomes a living bridge between promise and fulfillment. His stories of Canaan inspire courage in hearts that have known only wilderness. He tells them about the valley of Eshcol, the clusters of grapes so large they required 2 men to carry them, the flowing springs and fertile valleys, the cities they will conquer and the land they will inherit. But he also tells them about the giants. He does not minimize the challenges or exaggerate the ease of conquest. He prepares them for real warfare against real enemies. His faith is practical, not naive. Year 35 arrives with increased dying among the condemned generation. Their numbers dwindle rapidly now. The sentence nears completion. The promise draws closer. Caleb feels no satisfaction in their deaths, but he feels deep satisfaction in God's faithfulness. Every fulfilled judgment increases his confidence in every unfulfilled promise. The God who keeps his word about discipline will keep his word about blessing. The leadership structure shifts as Moses ages and Joshua rises. Plans begin forming for the conquest that awaits. Maps are drawn, strategies discussed, the theoretical becomes practical. But still they wait. God's timing remains perfect even when human impatience grows strong. The promise will be claimed exactly when ordained, not a day sooner or later. Year 38 brings dramatic acceleration in deaths. The rebellion generation fades rapidly now. Their time runs short. The wilderness that seemed eternal approaches its end. Caleb begins to feel something new stirring in his heart. Not just patience anymore, but anticipation. Not just endurance, but eagerness. The waiting has been long, but it has not been wasted. Year 39 sees the camp transform. The condemned generation becomes a small minority. The new generation takes leadership in preparation for conquest. Energy replaces resignation. Hope replaces despair. Moses himself begins to prepare for his own departure. His role in the story nears completion. Joshua will lead the conquest. Caleb will claim his inheritance. As year 40 dawns, only a handful remain from the generation that rejected God's promise. Their deaths no longer shock but confirm that the sentence is nearly complete. The time of wandering approaches its end. Caleb stands stronger at 80 than many men stand at 40. The wilderness has refined him, not weakened him. The waiting has prepared him, not discouraged him. The delay has increased his appreciation for the promise, not diminished it. The Jordan River appears in the distance. Canaan waits beyond its waters. The giants still inhabit their cities. The walls still stand fortified and strong. But Caleb's faith stands stronger than any wall and higher than any giant. 40 years in the wilderness have taught him that God's promises never fail, even when they seem forgotten. They arrive precisely on schedule, exactly as predicted. The time of dying is ending. The time of inheriting begins. I am still as strong today. The Jordan River lies behind them now, its waters parted like the Red Sea before it, confirming that the same God who began their journey will complete it. Canaan stretches ahead, no longer a memory, but a present reality. The conquest unfolds with divine precision. Jericho's walls collapse at the sound of trumpets. Ai falls after initial setback teaches valuable lessons. City after city surrenders to the advancing armies of the living God. But Caleb waits. While younger warriors claim their territories, he bides his time. While others settle into their inheritances, he prepares for his greatest battle. His prize requires more than military victory. It demands personal conquest. 7 years pass in warfare and division. The land gradually comes under control. Joshua, now advanced in years himself, begins the formal process of distributing inheritances. Each tribe receives its portion according to ancient promises. The ceremony takes place at Gilgal, where they first camped after crossing Jordan. Representatives from all 12 tribes gather to witness the historic moment. Boundaries are drawn. Lots are cast. The promised land becomes reality through legal distribution. Then Caleb steps forward. At 85 years old, he moves through the crowd with surprising vigor. His back remains straight. His eyes shine clear. His voice carries the authority of 8 decades well lived. The assembled leaders fall silent. Here stands a living legend, a man who walked with Moses, a survivor of the 40 wilderness years, one of only 2 from the Exodus generation still breathing. But Caleb does not come to reminisce about the past. He comes to claim the future. You know what the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea concerning you and me, he begins. His words carry weight beyond their simple meaning. Everyone present knows the story. The 12 spies, the evil report, the 40-year sentence. I was 40 years old when Moses sent me to spy out the land, Caleb continues. I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. His testimony reveals the source of his unique courage. He spoke from the heart, not from fear. My brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord, my God. The contrast could not be clearer. 10 spies spread discouragement. 1 spy spread faith. Moses swore to me that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. The promise was specific, personal, unconditional. Now behold, the Lord has kept me alive these 45 years as he spoke while the people of the land wandered in the wilderness. His survival was not accident, but appointment, not luck, but divine preservation. And now, here I am today, 85 years old. The number carries significance. Most men of his generation have long since died. He stands as living proof of God's faithfulness to his promises. But the most remarkable statement comes next. I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war and for going and coming. The crowd stirs at these words. 85 years old and claiming the strength of his youth? The wilderness should have broken him. Age should have weakened him. 4 decades of waiting should have discouraged him. Instead, he stands stronger than ever. Not just physically, though his body remains vigorous. More importantly, spiritually. His faith has been tested and proven unbreakable. His confidence in God's promises has been refined and purified. Now, therefore, give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. The request stuns everyone present. Of all the territories he could choose, he selects the most difficult, the most dangerous, the most challenging. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. The giants still inhabit the land he claims, the same giants that terrified 10 spies 45 years earlier, the descendants of those who made grown men feel like grasshoppers. But Caleb sees opportunity where others see obstacles. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord has spoken. His confidence rests not in his own ability, but in God's faithfulness. The same God who preserved him through 45 years will empower him for this final conquest. The assembly remains speechless. Here stands a man who refuses to settle for easy victories, who chooses difficult challenges over comfortable retirement, who believes God's best promises require faith's greatest risks. Joshua understands immediately. He knows Caleb's heart because he shares it. They alone survived the wilderness years. They alone maintained faith when surrounded by fear. They alone entered Canaan with the same hope they carried when they left Egypt. Without hesitation, Joshua grants the request. Hebron becomes Caleb's inheritance, exactly as Moses promised 45 years earlier at Kadesh Barnea. The circle closes perfectly. Promise meets fulfillment, but claiming the inheritance and conquering it remain 2 different challenges. Hebron sits in the hill country, surrounded by fortified cities and defended by giants. The sons of Anak have had 45 years to strengthen their positions. They rule from cities built for warfare and defended by warriors bred for battle. Caleb surveys his inheritance without flinching. These are the same hills he explored as a young spy, the same valleys where he gathered evidence of God's promises, the same territory where he first learned to see giants through heaven's perspective. The years have changed many things. He has aged. His companions have died. The next generation has risen to leadership. But one thing remains constant. God's promise never fails. As my strength was then, so my strength is now. The declaration becomes more than boast. It becomes battle cry. More than memory, it becomes mission. The old man prepares for war. At 85, when most men prepare for death, Caleb prepares for his greatest victory. The giants that intimidated him as a young man will fall before him as an old man. But first comes the claiming, then comes the conquering. The hill country of Hebron waits. Ancient stones stand ready to witness either triumph or tragedy. Giants prepare their defenses, but faith prepares its assault. Caleb's greatest battle approaches, not just against flesh and blood, but against the doubt and discouragement that whisper, "You're too old, it's too hard, the giants are too strong." But he has spent 45 years learning that God's promises never expire, that faith never retires, that giants fall hardest when attacked by those who have learned to see them through God's eyes rather than their own. The inheritance is claimed, the battle awaits, and Caleb stands ready, as strong at 85 as he was at 40, to prove once more that those who wholly follow the Lord never follow in vain. The taking of Hebron. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Judean hills as Caleb stood at the edge of his destiny. Before him rose Hebron, sprawling across the ridgeline like a sleeping giant. Its massive stone walls caught the early light, throwing geometric shadows down the terraced slopes. Somewhere within those ancient fortifications lived the descendants of Anak, the very giants who had terrorized 10 spies and doomed an entire generation to wander in the wilderness. At 85, Caleb's body bore the marks of a hard life. His joints creaked like old leather when he moved. His beard had turned white as desert salt, and lines mapped his weathered face like dry riverbeds carved by flash floods. Yet when he spoke, His voice carried the same fire that had once challenged a million doubters in the wilderness camp. "Give me this mountain," he had declared to Joshua with unwavering conviction. Not the fertile valleys where victory came easy, not the coastal plains where enemies fled at the first sign of resistance. He wanted the hardest ground, the place that had once shattered lesser men's courage like pottery against stone. The warriors who followed him up that rocky path watched with a mixture of wonder and concern. Here was a man who should have been content with peaceful retirement, telling stories to grandchildren by a warm hearth. Instead, he chose war against creatures of legend whose very existence had become the stuff of nightmares. His faith had carried him through 4 decades of burning sand and scorching sun, through funeral after funeral, as his generation died off one by one. Now that same faith would carry him up this final treacherous climb. Hebron was no ordinary hill town that could be taken with a single bold assault. The city sat nearly 3,000 feet above sea level, commanding the ancient ridge roads that connected the Mediterranean coastal plains to the Jordan River Valley. Its strategic position made it a natural fortress. Abraham himself had once walked these very hills and purchased a burial cave from the Hittites, making this ground sacred to every descendant of Isaac. The patriarchs slept in tombs carved from the limestone beneath the city, their presence lending weight to Caleb's claim. For centuries, Hebron had remained under the iron grip of the Anakim. These were not merely tall men, but giants whose bloodlines stretched back to the ancient world's most fearsome warriors. Archaeological evidence from similar sites suggests these cities were heavily fortified during this period, surrounded by massive cyclopean walls built from stones so large that later generations would assume only giants could have moved them. The Anakim had constructed their stronghold to last millennia. They trusted in height, in walls thicker than a man was tall, in the terrifying reputation of their ancestors whose deeds had become legend. They had not counted on an old man who measured strength by different standards entirely. Caleb's first assault came at dawn, when the morning mist still clung to the valley floors below. His seasoned warriors moved like shadows up the terraced slopes, using ancient olive groves for cover. These were not raw recruits, but veterans who had learned warfare in the conquest of eastern territories. They understood their commander's methods: patient, methodical, relentless. The element of surprise would not last long, but it would give them the initial advantage they needed. The defenders caught sight of the advancing forces as the sun crested the eastern hills, burning away the protective mist. War cries echoed off the limestone cliffs, bouncing back and forth until the very stones seemed to be shouting. Bronze weapons glinted like captured sunlight as warriors rushed to defensive positions that had never been seriously tested. The battle for Hebron, delayed for 45 years, had finally begun. What followed was not the quick victory of youth, but the grinding campaign of experience. The conquest unfolded over weeks, perhaps months of careful siege work. Each fortified position had to be studied, surrounded, and systematically reduced. Each giant stronghold required its own custom strategy. The Anakim had built their defenses assuming attackers would either retreat in terror or dash themselves uselessly against impregnable walls. They had not prepared for an enemy who combined faith with tactical brilliance. Caleb fought with the infinite patience of a man who had waited 45 years for this single moment. Every stone of the city was familiar to him. He had walked these paths as a young spy, memorizing approaches and noting weaknesses. Memory guided his steps now as much as current reconnaissance. He knew which gates faced morning sun and which lay in perpetual shadow. He understood the water system that fed the population. Most importantly, he recognized the psychology of defenders who had never faced serious challenge. The Anakim fought with the desperate fury of cornered legends. These were not ordinary warriors, but the living embodiments of nightmare. Men whose very size had once reduced 10 experienced spies to babbling terror. Their weapons were massive things that required tremendous strength just to lift. Their reach was so long that ordinary soldiers could not get close enough to strike effectively. Their battle roar could shake confidence from the bravest hearts and send horses rearing in panic. Yet they fell before Caleb's methodical advance like wheat before the harvester's blade. Age had taught him that giants, for all their impressive stature, were still mortal men. They bled when cut, they tired when pressed, they made mistakes under sustained pressure. Most critically, they had grown soft during generations of unchallenged dominance. One by one, the great clans crumbled. Ahiman, whose name meant brother of the right hand; Shishai, called the noble one; Talmai, the furrowed one, names that had echoed in Canaanite lore for generations, inspiring fear from the Mediterranean to the Jordan. These were not just individuals, but dynasties, family lines that had ruled Hebron since time immemorial. Their defeat marked the end of an era as surely as the setting of the sun. When the dust of the final battle settled, Caleb stood atop Hebron's highest tower. Below him stretched the inheritance he had claimed through sheer, stubborn belief. The city that had housed giants now belonged to a shepherd's son from Judah, whose only crown was white hair and whose only scepter was a worn staff. The impossible had become inevitable through the simple act of refusing to accept defeat. A legacy of lion-hearted faith, victory in warfare was one achievement, but building lasting peace required different skills entirely. Caleb did not simply conquer Hebron and move on to the next campaign like some roving warlord. He planted roots deep in the rocky soil. He built institutions that would outlast his lifetime. He established something permanent and meaningful. The old warrior understood that faith without practical follow-through was merely religious sentiment. True belief expressed itself in stone and mortar, in thriving families and prosperous future generations. His first administrative act revealed the depth of his strategic thinking. Water meant survival in the hill country, where rainfall was seasonal and springs were precious beyond gold. Caleb personally surveyed every water source within his new territory. Every spring that bubbled from the limestone, every stream that carved its way through the wadies, every hidden well that ancient peoples had dug and maintained. He mapped the underground channels that fed the region's agriculture. He negotiated agreements with neighboring tribes to ensure continued access to shared watersheds. This was not merely practical planning, but an act of faith in the future. A man of 85, with no guarantee of seeing another harvest, invested enormous time and energy in water rights that would benefit his great-grandchildren. He believed not only that God would give him victory, but that God intended his family to prosper in this place for generations to come. Next came the delicate matter of his daughter Asa's marriage. In that ancient culture, such arrangements carried tremendous weight for family alliances and territorial security. But Aksa was no ordinary young woman, waiting passively for her father's decision. Raised in the wilderness among warriors, trained in the harsh school of survival, she had inherited her father's courage along with his stubborn streak. When Caleb announced a contest for her hand, marriage to whoever could capture the nearby fortress town of Debir, she not only approved, but may have suggested the idea herself. The challenge attracted several suitors, but only one possessed the character to succeed. Othniel, Caleb's nephew, had grown up watching his uncle's example. He had learned that faith without action was worthless, that promises required someone willing to pay their price. Where others saw the fortified town of Debir as an impossible objective, he saw an opportunity to prove himself worthy of joining Caleb's family line. Othniel's assault on Debir followed the same pattern his uncle had established at Hebron: careful reconnaissance, patient siege work, relentless pressure until the defenders cracked. The victory was complete and decisive. When he claimed both the city and Aksa's hand in marriage, he demonstrated that he had inherited more than tactical knowledge. He possessed the spiritual qualities that made Caleb's faith effective in the real world. But Aksa proved she was truly her father's daughter when she approached Caleb on her wedding day with a request that revealed remarkable foresight. "You have given me land in the Negev," she said, referring to the southern territory that formed part of her dowry. "Now give me also springs of water." The Negev was useful grazing country, perfect for the large flocks that represented wealth in that pastoral economy. But without reliable water sources, even good pasture land remained marginally valuable. Aksa wanted not just inheritance, but the means to make that inheritance flourish. She understood that true security came not from owning property, but from controlling the resources that made property productive. Her request showed she had learned her father's lessons about thinking in terms of generations rather than seasons. Caleb's response exceeded even her bold request. He gave her both upper and lower springs, an entire water system that could support not just her immediate household's needs, but the requirements of a growing clan for decades to come. The gift represented enormous generosity, but it also demonstrated Caleb's understanding that legacy required practical foundation. Faith needed to be anchored in resources that would enable future faithfulness. Under Caleb's wise administration, Hebron transformed from conquered city to thriving regional center. Ancient trade routes that had been disrupted by warfare resumed operation, bringing merchants and their goods through Hebron's gates. Pilgrims began arriving to visit the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lay buried, making the city a destination for those seeking connection to the patriarchs. What had once symbolized fear and impossibility now represented hope and achievement. Archaeological excavations at sites similar to ancient Hebron have revealed evidence of significant construction projects during this general historical period. New defensive walls rose, built not just for protection but as symbols of permanence. Residential districts expanded to accommodate growing populations. Storage facilities multiplied to handle increased agricultural production and trade goods. The economic indicators suggest communities like Hebron experienced remarkable growth when placed under stable, visionary leadership. Caleb's descendants multiplied and prospered beyond what anyone might have predicted for the family of a minor tribal representative. The clan of Caleb became a powerful political and economic force within the larger tribe of Judah. They held territory that controlled vital mountain passes. They managed water rights that supported extensive agriculture. They maintained political influence that shaped regional decisions for generations. Where the 10 faithless spies left no lasting mark on history, Caleb's bloodline helped shape the future of the entire Promised Land. More than mere territory or political influence, Caleb established a pattern that would inspire future generations of believers. His life became living proof that persistent faith receives tangible rewards from a faithful God. Those who stand firm in the face of seemingly impossible odds often find themselves inheriting exactly what their opponents deemed impossible to obtain. Courage, like compound interest, grows stronger over time when consistently applied. Caleb versus the crowd. The contrast between Caleb and his fellow spies cuts to the very heart of human psychology and reveals fundamental truths about the nature of faith and fear. 12 men had once stood together at the edge of the Promised Land, staring into its depths with their own eyes. They had walked the same dusty paths under the same blazing sun. They had measured the same towering walls and encountered the same giant warriors. They had tasted grapes so large that clusters required 2 men to carry them. They had seen identical evidence with their own eyes, yet they returned with completely different reports. 10 spies saw mathematical impossibility. Their analysis was coldly logical, almost scientific in its precision. They counted enemy soldiers and estimated defensive capabilities. They measured wall thickness and calculated siege requirements. They assessed the size differential between average Hebrew fighters and Anakim giants. By every quantifiable standard available to military planners, the equation spelled certain disaster for any attacking force. Basic logic demanded immediate retreat to avoid catastrophic casualties. The 10 were not cowards in any traditional sense. These were experienced warriors, proven leaders who had survived the harsh wilderness and earned their tribe's trust. Their fear was not emotional panic, but rational calculation based on observable facts. They genuinely believed they were protecting their people from suicidal folly. Their recommendation to avoid invasion came from sincere concern for Hebrew survival, not from personal weakness or lack of commitment to their mission. Caleb and Joshua performed an entirely different calculation. They included a variable that the others had systematically ignored: the active presence and power of the God who had brought them out of Egypt through signs and wonders that defied natural law. Where the 10 saw insurmountable obstacles, the 2 saw guaranteed victory. Not because they were foolishly optimistic or blind to obvious dangers, but because they trusted a power that operated beyond the limitations of human strength and conventional military wisdom. This was not naive wishful thinking, but mature theological reasoning. The same God who had turned the Nile River to blood still ruled over natural forces. The one who had parted the Red Sea to create dry passage for millions of refugees had not suddenly become powerless at the sight of tall Canaanite warriors. The promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob carried the full weight of divine faithfulness behind them. Circumstances might change, but God's character remained constant across generations. The majority's rebellion that followed the spies' conflicting reports revealed how quickly corporate fear could poison an entire community's judgment. One person's doubt infected another's confidence, like plague spreading through crowded conditions. Anxiety multiplied exponentially as it passed from family to family, clan to clan. Soon, nearly 1 million people were ready to stone Moses and Aaron, murder Joshua and Caleb, and organize a mass return to Egyptian slavery rather than face the giants waiting in Canaan. The psychology was perfectly understandable. Fear offered the comfort of apparent prudence. It allowed people to feel wise and careful while avoiding personal risk. Retreat seemed like the intelligent choice for responsible family leaders who needed to protect wives and children from potential harm. Why gamble everything on promises that required supernatural intervention when safety lay just a few days' march behind them? Caleb and Joshua stood against this tide of corporate panic like rocks facing a flash flood. They tore their clothes in anguish and pled desperately with the people to reconsider their fatal choice. Their words carried the authentic ring of truth, but truth often loses to emotion when crowds make decisions under pressure. The majority preferred comfortable lies to challenging realities. They chose the path that felt safer in the short term, ignoring its long-term consequences. The results played out over 4 decades of slow death in the wilderness. The fearful majority got exactly what they had chosen: complete safety from Canaanite giants, purchased at the ultimate price of missing God's best promises for their lives. They successfully avoided the risks of conquest and received instead the certainty of wandering until their bones bleached white under the desert sun. Every funeral proved their choice had been tragically wrong, but by then correction was impossible. Caleb chose differently and endured the same 40-year delay as everyone else, but he endured it with hope intact rather than faith gradually dying. While others complained bitterly about their circumstances and slowly gave up on life, he used the wilderness years to strengthen his trust in God's promises and prepare himself for eventual victory. When the time finally came to enter the land, he was spiritually and physically ready for the challenges ahead. This pattern repeats throughout human history with depressing regularity. Crowds naturally gravitate toward apparent safety and conventional wisdom. Individuals of genuine faith consistently embrace calculated risks based on divine promises that seem foolish to majority opinion. The masses choose paths of least resistance that feel comfortable in the moment. The faithful minority walks uphill toward rewards that require personal cost to obtain. The 10 spies faded into historical obscurity, remembered only as examples of how fear can blind people to divine possibility. Their names are preserved in Scripture, but only as cautionary tales. They represent the tragedy of people who could see clearly, but chose to look in the wrong direction. Caleb's name endures as a symbol of faith that persists despite overwhelming contrary evidence: the forgotten hero. In the end, Caleb disappears from the biblical narrative with surprising quietness that speaks volumes about both his character and his understanding of true significance. There is no dramatic death scene with final words preserved for posterity, no elaborate funeral ceremony attended by dignitaries from across the known world, no towering monument raised to commemorate his extraordinary achievements. He simply fades from the historical record, leaving behind only the territory he conquered and the descendants who inherited his spiritual strength. This literary silence reveals the depth of Caleb's humility and his genuine understanding of what mattered most. He had never sought personal fame or historical recognition as motivation for his actions. His goal was never individual glory, but faithful obedience to the God who had made promises to his ancestors. When his assigned work was completed successfully, he was perfectly content to step back into the ordinary rhythms of family life and local administration. The conquest of Hebron became its own lasting memorial, more permanent than any statue carved from stone. Yet his influence continued to echo through the centuries that followed with ever expanding ripples. His descendants, known throughout later generations as the Calebites, maintained their distinct identity within the larger tribal structure of Judah. They held some of the most strategically important territory in the entire Promised Land, mountain passes that controlled trade routes, water sources that supported agriculture, and defensive positions that guarded against invasion from the south. Archaeological evidence suggests these family clans continued to prosper and wield political influence long after their founding patriarch's death. The city that Caleb captured through faith and determination became one of ancient Canaan's most significant population centers. King David himself would later choose Hebron as his first royal capital, ruling the southern kingdom from there for 7 full years before eventually moving his government to Jerusalem. This was no accident of geography, but a calculated decision that recognized Hebron's strategic importance and symbolic weight. David built his monarchy on the spiritual and political foundation that Caleb had established through decades of faithful service. The cave of Machpelah, where Abraham had buried Sarah and where he himself was later laid to rest, drew pilgrims from across the ancient world. Visitors came to connect with the patriarchs and to remember the promises God had made to their ancestors. Hebron became not just a city, but a destination, a place where faith was strengthened through remembrance of divine faithfulness across generations. More than political influence or economic prosperity, Caleb left behind a spiritual legacy that transcended his immediate family and tribal connections. His life story became a template for later generations who faced their own seemingly impossible challenges. The man who conquered giants at 85 demonstrated that faith recognizes no expiration date and that divine promises remain valid regardless of human limitations or advancing years. His example offered particular hope to those who felt forgotten by history or overlooked by their contemporaries. Not every act of faithful obedience receives immediate public recognition. Some victories unfold quietly in obscurity, their full significance emerging only as time passes and their consequences multiply. Caleb's greatest triumph was not the conquest of any particular city, but the unwavering consistency of his character across more than 8 decades of life. Modern readers often wonder why such a remarkable figure receives relatively little attention compared to other biblical heroes whose stories are retold and celebrated. The answer perhaps lies in the very nature of his heroism, which embodied qualities that rarely generate headlines or capture popular imagination. Caleb was not a king ruling from a palace, a prophet delivering dramatic messages, or a priest performing sacred ceremonies. He held no official title beyond tribal representative and wielded no authority except what his character earned through consistent faithfulness. He represented the heroism of ordinary people who choose extraordinary faith when circumstances demand it. His courage was not the flashy bravery of dramatic moments, but the steady persistence of someone who simply refused to give up on God's promises. His victories were not spectacular displays of supernatural power, but the gradual, grinding triumphs of someone who kept moving forward when others stopped walking. In a contemporary world obsessed with instant fame and viral celebrity, Caleb's story offers a radically different model of true success. He measured his life not in years of public recognition, but in moments of private faithfulness that no one else witnessed. He achieved victory not by defeating his enemies quickly in glorious battle, but by outlasting them completely through patient endurance and unwavering trust. The central question his life poses remains as relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago. What does it mean to live like Caleb when the crowd chooses the easier path and walks away from God's best promises? Perhaps it means being willing to stand alone with truth when everyone else embraces comfortable lies. Perhaps it means measuring strength by divine standards rather than human calculations. Perhaps it means waiting 45 years for the fulfillment of a promise, then fighting giants at 85 to claim what God had always intended to give. Caleb's enduring legacy lives not in monuments of carved stone that eventually crumble, but in the timeless example of faith that refuses to be defeated by circumstances. His life provides conclusive proof that one ordinary person who trusts God completely can move the course of history more effectively than a million who trust him only partially. Through simple, stubborn faithfulness, he demonstrated that believers armed with extraordinary trust can indeed defeat any giants that stand between them and God's promises.